Welcome everyone to the first Dharma talk of the retreat, and tonight we're going to be talking about how we cultivate the boundless heart of awakening in the retreat space through the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and through our meditation practice. So this talk is about some of the foundational teachings of the Buddha and the intricacies and brilliance of his wisdom that has spanned 2,500 years. And these teachings continue to flow with immense relevance into the present moment and are as important now as they were 2,500 years ago in meeting the challenges that we face on earth. So what is the nature of these foundational teachings that the Buddha shared through his insights and realizations into his own mind? And how can we use this precious time in the retreat space to integrate this knowledge and cultivate inner balance in meeting the chaos of the times that we're living through? So just to go back a little bit, that the teachings of the Buddha are known as the Buddha Dharma, and the Dharma just means, like Mal was speaking about it before, means the way things are, or the natural laws of the cosmos. And these natural laws can be revealed to us through our meditation practice, and that can arise as insights and can help us to see how we become entangled in our patterns of reactivity or our patterns of conditioning. And these precious insights arise and are revealed through like a weaving of ethics and morality and wisdom that start to sort of, it feels almost like they work on us internally through, the retreat space, and then how that ripples out into our lives beyond our meditation cushions. And how we can together find a path of individual but also collective liberation and freedom. So we know that the Buddha was really a brilliant teacher, and as brilliant teachers kind of have ways of helping us to learn, and so he made lists, and he made many, many, many lists, and lists that we can remember, and we can, sometimes it can help. I've often had them beside me to look at and just refer to, because it can help us to sort of see where we're heading. But these lists were an extraordinary roadmap to cultivate the boundless heart of awakening, and to keep us centered when we encountered difficulties or difficult terrain in the form of, painful thoughts, emotions, feelings, and sensations. The lists also help to reveal important insights about the true nature of existence and what the Buddha spoke about as anicca, the impermanence of all conditioned phenomena that will arise and dissolve. The second is dukkha, which refers to as suffering or ill-being, and in the Buddha's insights, dukkha was connected to the human condition where we experience illness, aging, and death as part of what it means to be human. And the third is anatta, or what his insights were that this thing called the self cannot be found in any conditioned phenomena. So we suffer because we get stuck in cyclic patterns of reactivity known as samsara, and samsara is connected to our conditioning. So when we can bring insight and compassion to these cyclic patterns, we can begin to dissolve the chains that bind us, and we can begin to see that there may be another way to free the heart-mind. And this happens often through dissolving these patterns that can be identified as greed, hatred, and delusion or ignorance. So through freeing the heart-mind, we come to know ourselves as an interconnected part of the earth, that we're like a tiny cell in this greater living organism or system. And the Buddha said, or he was heard to say, in this fathom-long body, the whole of the universe is contained. And everything that we do has an impact on this earth system. That every thought, every action, every word shows up somehow in these threads of conditioning. And I think it was the Buddha also that said that our actions are our only possessions. So can we recognize the importance of this work that we're undertaking, like on this retreat, that cultivates an energy of focus and concentration, loving kindness and mindfulness, in recognizing that everything we do to ourselves, we do to the earth. In this room right now, there's a really broad range of Dharma experience, and Mal suggests that if the things that are contained in this talk feel very familiar to you, that you might like to consider that Buddhist practices, whether they're basic or advanced, lead to the awakening of the heart-mind. And also, if you're new to retreats, please know that it's not uncommon to feel a little uncertain with all of this information and all of these lists. And we encourage you to go gently and to trust that the information that you need to hear will be planted or will drop into like seeds into your consciousness to kind of flourish, perhaps now, but perhaps at a later date. And as we spoke about before, on this retreat, we'll be cultivating and following the teachings of the Buddha in the form of the Satipatthana Sutta. A brilliant teaching in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which are, just to go over them again, Mal spoke a little about them before, but are mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind states, and mindfulness of the dhammas or phenomena, or these, like a way to think about that is mindfulness of some of the lists that we've been talking about. We'll also be cultivating serenity and insight as a way to integrate the teachings into our practice, and we'll also be getting up close and personal with dukkha, with suffering. And we'll be it's like we're putting dukkha under the microscope and looking really closely at the causes of dukkha and how we can experiment with finding freedom from dukkha. We'll also be practicing working with the hindrances, which are, the hindrances are like these unconscious conditioned patterns of habit energy. And the hindrances are gifts on this path of awakening. We'll also be deeply curious about another list that the Buddha referred to as the 7 factors of awakening, which are qualities of mind referred to as the 7 treasures of a Tathagata or a Buddha. And interestingly, the Buddha also called these 7 factors of awakening the anti-hindrances, because they can counteract the forces of the mind that can keep us stuck in ignorance and delusion. These 7 factors help us to incline the mind towards freedom. And in Sanskrit, this freedom is known as nirvana, or in Pali it's known as nibbana, which means to extinguish or to go out like a fire or to cool. So we're cooling these patterns of habit energy. To extinguish what is also referred to as the 3 poisons of the mind, the greed, hatred, and delusion, which tend to be, they're always at the root of suffering. So these factors of awakening are things that we can practice and strengthen and help us to meet the challenges of life. And many of the Buddha's teachings sort of are woven into each other. So the list of the 7 factors of awakening include mindfulness, investigation, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And we'll be doing different practices and hearing more about those qualities in the coming days. And while meditation, we know from science tells us, and we know from our own personal experience, that meditation's enormously beneficial to our health, well-being, and how we show up in the world, in our relationships and our communication. But there's a saying that meditation can also reveal what needs to be healed. And this retreat space is a gift to deepen our practice, but it can also take enormous courage to be present with whatever arises. And many of us, and some of you shared things, experiences in the opening conversation that we had, but many people have experienced trauma or grief and loss, past and recently too. And so we just suggest that if that is the case, if that's very close to the surface for you, that you go very gently, armed with much kindness, metta, loving kindness, and warm friendliness for whatever arises in each moment. And that you see that as your practice. Being open to whatever arises on retreat in each moment lays this foundation for us to be able to inquire deeply into each moment beyond the retreat as well. And we're so conditioned to avoid things that are unpleasant, and we usually do this through distraction, avoidance, or numbing out through, maybe drugs or alcohol. And so it's not surprising that when we begin to sit with our experience, we become more acutely aware of dukkha. And I've been teaching MBSR for many years, and it's not uncommon for people to say, "Oh, this course is making me feel worse, not better." And as facilitators, we're like, "Great, just hang in there." But it can seem really counterintuitive. And the same on retreat too. We often, if we can have that intention to just be present for whatever arises with loving kindness, holding our pain and suffering in the way that a mother holds a child, even just holding that intention that can help us to have the courage to gently turn towards. And we gently turn towards like dipping our toes in the water. We don't have to dive straight in and overwhelm ourselves, but we just go very slowly, very gently, and very kindly. And I was just going to share that I think even in my experience, I turned 60 last year, and even when we think that, you know, maybe we're working through our layers of conditioned dukkha, there are always more that arise, but there's sort of a confidence that I think that develops in, this too, like I have the courage, I have the skills, I have the tools to turn towards. Doesn't mean that we don't get sort of sideswiped or thrown off our, or like removed from our equanimity. But can we trust in the teachings and in our practice to cultivate present moment awareness so we can choose in each moment how we show up? And I like the metaphor that many of you will have heard Mal speak about, that our minds are like pools of water. And when the mind starts to become still, we notice all of the garbage and crap and broken bottles and rusty cans on the bottom of the pond. And that often includes the parts of ourselves that we would prefer to, you know, ignore or not to look at. Or sometimes parts of ourselves that we might have forgotten about or lost sight of. So remembering that the acknowledgement of the rusty cans and broken bottles, or dukkha, is the first of the Four Noble Truths. And within these truths or reality, the whole of the Buddha's teachings are contained. So it's the most extraordinarily elegant simplicity, and yet this vast, vast complexity. And interestingly, and I think I read this in Mal's book, but as a psychologist, like I just love it, that at the time of the Buddha, the time that the Buddha lived, the Four Noble Truths in ancient India were like a diagnostic tool that could be applied to dysfunction and disease, and in fact to any problem for deeper understanding and insight. That was in your book, Mal, wasn't it? Yeah, I think, yeah, it was really interesting. So I love how you can apply it to any kind of, anything that's going on. I had a particularly challenging teenage daughter, and you could easily see she's come out the other side now. So the Four Noble Truths, just to go back, are that the first noble truth is that there is dukkha, there is suffering, there is sickness, aging, and death. The second truth is there are causes and conditions of dukkha. The third is that there's freedom from dukkha. And the fourth is this beautiful unfolding noble eightfold path, the path from dukkha to be free of dukkha. And the opposite, when we look at the Four Noble Truths, the opposite of dukkha is sukha, which is translated as happiness. And when we flip the Four Noble Truths around, we can also see that this is actually cultivating a path to happiness. The fourth noble truth, or the eightfold path, so again a beautiful, elegant list, was summarized by the Buddha as containing the essential elements of the path to realizing our potentiality. And these are the words, this was what the Buddha was heard to say. And what, monks, is the noble truth of the way of practice leading to the cessation of dukkha? It is just this noble eightfold path, namely right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So it's a path that we can follow, this path. And it has 3 components, one of which is ethics, and one of which involves meditation, and one which involves the cultivation of wisdom. And, sorry, I've got a mosquito. It's a path we can follow and integrate the teachings that we're hearing, and to remember that this path is not always linear, but that each of these qualities support each other in this vast inner transformation. The Eightfold Path is also a diagnostic tool where we can sort of identify where we get stuck. And it's also, you know, with so much going on in the world just now, it's also an amazing path that we can apply to dukkha arising in the world to help us to have deeper insights and to, you know, to know how to respond. Mal, also in his beautiful book, Healing the Heart and Mind with Mindfulness, speaks about 2 levels of the Eightfold Path that are both, one is that the Eightfold Path is noble and the other is ennobling. And the noble level involves the realization of nibbana, or the experience of the unconditioned, which is when everything falls away. The ennobling level involves our active commitment to a path of transformation and unfolding awakening. So this is so powerful, and the power of bringing awareness to our conditioned habit energies allows us to uproot them and to choose other ways of being. And in my experience, it's like we digest these teachings and then we metabolize them. And it's almost like, you know, you can feel the transformative energies working from the inside out. It's a little bit like eating healthy food, that no matter what's going on in our body, nutrition is always cultivating deeper states of well-being and energy. And it's the same with the mind. When we encounter these teachings, it's like breathing them into our being, where they begin to work on our consciousness and transform us from the inside out to reveal more of our true nature, which, like in some traditions, is referred to as Buddha nature. And Buddha nature can sometimes be buried under layers of murky, conditioned experiences. So yeah, retreats actually give us an intense experience, or can, not always, but can give us an intense experience of working with dukkha. And it does take skill and courage and a commitment to turn towards what has sometimes been stored as energetic knots in the body sometimes for lifetimes. And, you know, epigenetics tells us that could even be like handed down as the experiences of our ancestors. But dukkha arising on retreat can also manifest as any type of experience we don't want, from mosquitoes to noise to weather patterns. It's anything that we perceive as unpleasant or unwanted. And we can inadvertently feed our suffering through aversion. And a suggestion is to see dukkha, or anything that's arising that's unpleasant, as as an unpleasant offering where you almost bring your hands together and bow to it, because that is, that's the gold, and where we get to begin to practice with those things. And when we can hold dukkha in loving presence with a willingness to turn towards things that show up, like our feelings, our perception, mental formations, and consciousness, we begin to transform the pain and the suffering into wisdom and into compassion. And it never ceases to surprise me. Like a few years ago, I always think of this when I come here, that a few years ago I was coming to a retreat with Sabana and Shisha, and I was very tired and very burnt out, and I was not consciously aware, but I was very attached to the fact that I was coming to a retreat. I was going to have a great experience. I was going to leave feeling fantastic. And, but within that clinging, it just took a couple of texts from my ex-husband to give me enough disturbance that I spent much of the retreat working with the remnants of resentment rather than basking in bliss. So it's this openness to whatever is going to arise will arise, and to see it as a gift. I finished that retreat with a lot more compassion for him, I have to say. That was so funny. Anyway, so getting up close and personal with dukkha, we begin to see how much the suffering comes from these patterns of our mind and the causes and conditions of suffering. And this leads us to glimpse into that there is a possibility that there's freedom from suffering. And this then naturally unfolds onto the fourth truth of that there is a path that we can walk and we can cultivate. A metaphor that you've probably heard before about the Four Noble Truths is that dukkha is like a beautiful lotus, and this is the path of practice. It's like a beautiful lotus emerging from the mud, where the richer the mud, the more beautiful the lotus. So again, just how can we see how can we see dukkha as the transformative gold and almost smile and bow to it, which is a part of the process of waking up and discovering freedom of the heart mind on the path of awakening. And it's not spiritual bypassing either, which is kind of jumping over the dukkha and going for the love and the light. That's something too that can be very much a part of like increasing kind of dukkha. So just being aware of a tendency that is not an uncommon tendency. So as we embrace dukkha with our hearts and minds, please remember the health warnings that were outlined in the protocols that we asked you to read before the retreat. And that is, if you are activated or triggered or overwhelmed in any way, please feel free to lean into what you need to do in that moment. And that may be to stand up and ground yourself and open your eyes. That may be to go for a walk, to come back to the breath. It may be, if you're paying attention to the body, to pay attention to a neutral part of the body. Often, that could be the hands or even the ears, if sometimes the breath can be activating. And the invitation is to go gently and mindfully, honoring and respecting your discomfort, but not pushing through it. And that's a really important thing as well. And if there's a really wonderful concept that was developed by Dan Siegel called the window of tolerance, which is a beautiful kind of picture where it allows us to see that in the middle of the window of tolerance is kind of when our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems are balanced. That when we become hyper aroused is like where fight, flight and chronic activation can we can linger, and sometimes we can be in hyper arousal and not even be aware. And then also we can drop into hypoarousal, which is more associated with states of hopelessness, lethargy, and even depression. So I think we included a window of tolerance in the things that we sent out. It's quite easy to, if you Google it, not that you're going on your phones and computers, but it's a really great, great diagram to have. And it's a good way just to check in with yourself on retreat and ask yourself, where am I in my window of tolerance? Am I sort of hyper? Am I hypo? Or am I just kind of cruising along in the middle? And please let us know if you're struggling, so that we can support you and prevent any kind of spirals. And sometimes that can show up as maybe like sleep disturbance, or increasing patterns of the mind, like papancha, like where the mind kind of becomes very active and there are lots of connected thoughts and things. So we are here for you for the duration of the retreat. So if you don't feel comfortable asking a question in the group, please come and just speak to one of us. So another way that we can support ourselves is connecting with our inner resources of the heart. And the Buddha taught these inner resources as the 4 heart qualities. And or the 4 divine abodes of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. And these divine abodes are what help us to connect with ourselves and with each other and with the earth. And it's through the divine abodes and insights that we really can remember who we truly are, that we are part of this living, breathing world. So, as I mentioned before, a part of the practice also involves cultivating these practices in the body, and we'll be doing that each morning through the yoga and through relaxation. These practices also help us to remember that we're not alone in our pain and in our suffering. And so I'm just going to, just because we know that we learn these lists, so I'm just going to say them again about the Eightfold Path, coming back to the path of practice. Right view, which is the way that we understand things. It's like, I like to think of right view like, when we build a foundation, a house, that the foundation of the house has to be solid. If the foundation is wobbly, the whole structure is going to collapse. So right view and right understanding is a really important part of seeing clearly. Right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And so we'll be weaving all of those qualities through the practices on this retreat, and we'll be focusing on the 2 aspects that Mal mentioned, which are serenity and insight. So Serenity is based on the arising of samadhi, which is a state of concentration, tranquility and absorption, where our mental energies are gathered, collected and unified. And these practices are also called shamatha, or calm abiding, or tranquility, as they lead to the relaxation of the body, calming and stilling the mind and easing the heart. They also facilitate clear seeing and support insight through a flow of being absorbed in the present moment. And we do this also by cultivating insight, which is known as vipassana. And it's about seeing clearly and distinctly through inquiring into the nature of mind. And with this bare attention, we see the arising and dissolving of phenomena. And our insights open up, and we come back to seeing those three truths, or the three characteristics of existence: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and emptiness, or not self. So serenity is about concentration, absorption, and the heart. And insight is about inquiry and investigation. And a balance of insight and serenity support us in meeting the expansiveness of the present moment and to wake up to the way things are. So can we bring the energy of mindfulness into each moment in our lives on retreat? And these precious moments that we have to let thoughts about the past or the future rest in the background while we make this commitment to ourselves to be right here, right now. And a way that it's often helpful to gather some of that energy that's needed is to remember that we're not just practicing for ourselves, but we're also practicing for our loved ones and for the benefit of all beings. So that can often help to rouse the energy and motivation. And our practice will reveal what we were talking about before, the hindrances. And the hindrances are obstacles not just to our meditation practice, but they're actually also obstacles in life. So there are many ways to work with the hindrances, and we'll be sharing some of those. But we suggest just for now to be aware of them and see if you can make a commitment to yourself not to feed them. So the retreat space is a perfect place to observe how the hindrances arrive. And just to go back over that list again of the hindrances, they include obsessive sensual desire. So noticing when the mind is even thinking about breakfast or thinking about, something else other than being right here, right now. Aversion or ill will. Sloth and torpor. And sloth and torpor is something that often will emerge, particularly if you're jet lagged. That's also the noble tiredness. So often that will happen, if you've traveled across the other side of the world, it's likely that the noble tiredness is going to be here. It's also likely that it's going to be here because of all of the effort that it takes to arrive on retreat. So, the busyness that you've all been engaging in order to be right here, right now. So we encourage you to lean into the noble tiredness and rest as much as you need to, but also watch where, maybe the noble tiredness kind of merges with sloth and torpor, and there are ways of rousing the energy. Restlessness and worry, and the other one, paralyzing doubt, which can show up, paralyzing doubt can show up about questioning the teachings or the teachers, but just notice, notice those waves of the mind, and how that habit energy may be showing up. Of course, it's always good to question teachers, I think, too, isn't it? But just notice sometimes, there can be, sometimes the aversion can kind of arise. All right. So holding the hindrances in loving presence, but making an endeavour not to feed them. Another good idea can be to rejoice in being aware of the hindrances. I think that's a suggestion from Mal. And in this way, that rather than beating ourselves up, we're turning towards them with this kind of joyful energy of like, I see you. For example, and that could be, in how we relate to the noble tiredness. So I see you, noble tiredness, but I also maybe see you, sloth and torpor, and just holding those energies with tenderness. So while this has been an unbelievable lot of information, please remember that this practice has a profound capacity to change the energy for ourselves, for each other, and for the planet. And in relation to global suffering on the planet, Thich Nhat Hanh says that the way out is in, and that each of us are called to do this inner work to contribute to outer change and outer peace. And this path of awakening is not linear, but it opens up myriad possibilities through freeing the heart-mind, reducing our karmic footprint, and bringing greater balance and well-being to the earth and all beings. So thank you for your kind attention and through the noble tiredness. And we might just sit just for a few minutes and just allow those words to dissolve.